They thought you'd stay quiet forever, that you'd keep absorbing the pain, explaining yourself, fixing everything, even when they were the one breaking it. But something changed, didn't it? The empath finally had enough. And when an empath is fed up, it's not a meltdown, it's a rebirth. The same heart that once begged for peace now chooses power. And here's what narcissists don't see coming. When the empath walks away, they take the narcissist's power with them. No more supply. No more emotional reaction. Just silence and freedom. This isn't just a story of survival. It's the moment the tables turn. And trust me, you'll want to stay till the end. Because what happens when the one who used to heal stops caring and starts glowing will shock you. If you've ever been that quiet soul pushed too far, this is your moment. Drop a comment below if you know what it feels like to finally choose yourself. And hit that subscribe button, because this isn't the end. It's just the beginning. There comes a moment in every empath's life. A moment that no one else sees coming. It's quiet. It doesn't come with shouting or anger or slamming doors. It arrives in the stillness, after the last tear has fallen, after the soul has been stretched to its limit. It's not dramatic. It's not loud. But it is final. And it changes everything. For years, the empath gave more than they had. They apologized when they weren't wrong. They tried to fix what wasn't theirs to fix. They showed up, even when they were exhausted. They held space for the chaos, trying to soothe storms they didn't create. They smiled through pain, softened their words, shrank themselves to make others feel bigger. Especially the narcissist. The one who took more than anyone else. The one who wore charm like a mask and called their cruelty honesty. The one who made the empath feel guilty for feeling anything at all. It wasn't just one thing that broke the empath. It was the slow build-up, the 1,000 tiny cuts, the moments of gaslighting, the twisting of truth, the dismissals, the mockery, the manipulation that came dressed as love. It was the deep loneliness of being next to someone who only loved their reflection in your eyes. And still, the empath stayed, hoping, believing, trying, because empaths are wired to heal, to hold on, to give one more chance. But even the kindest soul has a limit. And when that limit is reached, when the final straw is pulled, it's not rage that follows. It's clarity. Suddenly, everything becomes clay. The words that once confused now sound like noise. The guilt no longer works. The tears dry up, not because the pain is gone, but because the heart is done begging to be seen. The empath realizes they've been playing a game they never agreed to. And without a word, they stop playing. That's when the narcissist feels it. Not through yelling or arguments, but through silence. Through detachment. Through indifference. See, the narcissist never feared losing the empath's love. What they truly feared was losing the control. And that's exactly what happens when the empath finally says enough. They don't say it with drama. They say it by walking away mentally, emotionally, spiritually, long before their feet ever move. They become unreadable, unavailable, unreachable. The empath who once responded to every mood, every insult, every silent treatment, now offers nothing. And in the narcissist's world, nothing is terrifying. Because now, the empath isn't trying to be understood. They are not explaining themselves, not proving their worth, not shrinking to fit. They're just done. And that quiet exit, it shakes the very foundation of the narcissist's ego. But this moment isn't about revenge. It's about rebirth. When the empath finally lets go, they begin to rediscover who they were before the emotional weight. They remember their laughter, their dreams, their light. They look in the mirror and see someone rising, not from anger, but from truth. And here's the part that no one talks about. When an empath detaches, they become more powerful than the narcissist ever imagined. Because that power comes from awareness. The empath now sees everything clearly. The patterns, the manipulation, the cycles. And with that clarity comes wisdom, strength, boundaries, The empath no longer needs to be liked. They no longer need to be chosen. They are not seeking closure, they are creating it. On their own terms. Quietly. Powerfully. People around them might not understand the shift. They might say, "You've changed." And the empath will smile. Because yes, they have. They've stopped trying to save people who don't want to be saved. They've stopped watering gardens that never grew anything but thorns. They've stopped setting themselves on fire to keep others warm. And maybe, just maybe, for the first time in their life, they've chosen themselves. This doesn't mean they've lost their compassion. It means they've finally turned some of that compassion inward. It means they've realized that love doesn't mean losing yourself. That peace isn't something you find in other people. It's something you protect within yourself. And the narcissist, they'll notice. They'll come back with new masks, new games, new promises. They'll test the empath's strength. Try to reel them back in with charm or guilt or chaos. But the empath who's reached their limit no longer takes the bait. They don't fight. They don't explain. They simply move on. Because once the final straw has been pulled, the empath doesn't look back. Not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. Not because they've stopped loving, but because they've started healing. The world often underestimates the quiet ones, the gentle ones, the empaths. But beneath that softness is a force the narcissist could never understand. It's the strength to endure, to forgive, to feel deeply, and when needed, to walk away with dignity. So, if you've ever been that empath, if you've ever loved too much, stayed too long, broken your own heart trying to keep someone else whole, know this, your moment will come. The moment when clarity pierces through the fog, and you finally say, "Enough." And when it does, don't be afraid of what follows. Because it won't be destruction. It will be your becoming. Empaths may seem like they weren't paying attention, but they were. Every word, every silence, every shift in tone, every manipulation, they absorbed it all. Not because they were trying to fight back, but because they were trying to understand. That's what empaths do. They feel deeply, and they listen with more than their ears. Over time, without even realizing it, they've memorized the narcissist's entire playbook. They've seen the charm used to hook them in. They've felt the cold withdrawal when the narcissist needed control. They've heard the lies twisted into half-truths, and the cruel words disguised as honesty. They've watched the cycle repeat itself, idealize, devalue, discard, over and over. At first, it broke them, confused them, hurt them to their core. But eventually, it woke them. And now, the empath knows exactly what's coming next. The difference. They are no longer reacting. They no longer take the bait. They don't argue, don't defend, don't fall into the emotional trap set for them. And that's what terrifies the narcissist. Because a calm, clear-eyed empath, one who knows the game and chooses not to play, is unpredictable, unreadable, unshakable. And once the narcissist loses their power to provoke a reaction, they lose. Completely. There's a kind of silence that screams louder than any words ever could. It's not the silence of defeat or withdrawal. It's the silence of a soul that has finally chosen peace over chaos. For the empath, this silence doesn't come easily. They're used to speaking gently, to soothing tension, to explaining themselves in the hope of being understood. They've spent so long trying to be heard that silence once felt like giving up. But not anymore. Now, silence is a boundary. It's a decision. It's a message that says, I'm no longer available for the drama. The narcissist, who once thrived on the empath's emotional reactions, begins to feel that silence like a door slamming shut. No more pleading. No more tears. No more justifications. Just calm. Just distance. Just stillness. And that stillness is terrifying to someone who's built their power on emotional chaos. See, when the empath used to cry, defend, or get angry, it meant they were still engaged, still trapped in the cycle, still feeding the narcissist with their energy. But silence breaks the cycle. It creates space. And in that space, the narcissist is left alone, with their own emptiness. That's when the panic starts. They try to provoke. They push harder. They bait with guilt, blame, or sudden kindness. But the empath has changed. They no longer need to prove anything. They no longer need the narcissist's approval. That silence, it isn't passive. It's active. It's choosing peace over performance. It's choosing healing over hostility. It's the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needs to shout to be strong. And in that silence, something incredible happens. The empath begins to hear themselves again. Their own thoughts. Their own truth. Their own worth. What once felt like emptiness now becomes freedom. Without the constant noise, they can finally breathe. Finally think clearly. Finally rest. The narcissist, meanwhile, grows increasingly agitated. They don't know how to navigate a version of the empath that doesn't flinch, doesn't cry, doesn't argue. The control slips further with each silent day. And for the first time, the narcissist feels what the empath lived through for so long: disconnection, confusion, and powerlessness. But the empath doesn't stay silent to hurt anyone. They stay silent to heal, to stop bleeding energy into someone who never respected it, to realign with their own peace. This silence isn't about punishing the narcissist. It's about protecting the self. And the longer it lasts, the stronger the empath becomes. Because silence creates space. And in that space, the empath starts building something new. Self-respect, boundaries, clarity, purpose. They begin to realize that they never needed to raise their voice to be heard. They just needed to stop explaining themselves to people committed to misunderstanding them. That's when the power shift becomes permanent. The narcissist no longer has access to their emotions, their reactions, or their light. And the empath, they begin to glow again. Softly at first, quietly, but steadily. And that glow is untouchable, because it comes from deep within, from healing, from survival, from a strength that no longer needs to be loud to be real. That's the kind of power silence brings. The kind that frees the empath, not just from the narcissist, but from every lie they once believed about themselves. They no longer need to be enough for someone else. They finally feel whole, simply by being who they are. And all of it started the moment they stopped responding. The moment the silence began. There's a moment when the empath, who once gave their heart so freely, suddenly grows quiet. Not with resentment, not out of fear, but with deep, soul-level clarity. It's not the silence of surrender. It's the silence of awakening. The empath who used to defend themselves, explain their every move, and justify their feelings now sits in stillness. And that stillness is not weakness. It's a shift in power. For so long, the empath was caught in a loop, reacting to manipulation, trying to explain what they meant, trying to be understood, trying to make it right. But none of it was ever enough, because with a narcissist, the rules are always changing, and the goalposts are always moving. No matter how much the empath gave, it was never truly received. And eventually, that giving begins to drain the soul. So, the empath stops. Not out of anger, not to play games, but because something in them breaks free. They no longer feel the need to win the argument, to prove their worth, or to seek validation from someone who thrives on chaos. The silence that follows isn't empty. It's full of truth. It's full of boundaries. It's full of energy that used to be wasted on defending against accusations and manipulation. And when the empath stops talking, stops reacting, stops trying to fix it, something incredible happens. The narcissist loses control. Completely. Because the narcissist depends on the empath's reactions like fuel. They need outrage. They need confusion. They need tears. It makes them feel important, powerful, in control. But silence. Silence is unpredictable. Silence is unreadable. Silence is terrifying to someone who built their identity around controlling the emotional weather of others. The narcissist leans in, tests the boundaries, pushes buttons, but the empath doesn't move, doesn't flinch, doesn't take the bait. And that's when the panic sets in. That's when the narcissist realizes they've lost the very thing they counted on the most, the empath's emotional engagement. Silence becomes the empath's final word. Not because they don't have more to say, but because they've said it all 100 times, and it never mattered. Now, what matters is their peace, their energy, their healing. And as they stay quiet, their mind becomes louder in the best way, filled with the sound of their own voice, their own needs, their own wisdom. It becomes a sanctuary instead of a battleground. And for the narcissist, this is the ultimate defeat. They can't argue with silence. They can't twist silence into guilt. They can't manipulate a reaction that no longer exists. The empath, once emotionally tangled in every interaction, now walks free, not because the narcissist changed, but because they did. They chose peace over performance, stillness over suffering, strength over survival mode. And that strength doesn't scream. It whispers. It glows. It settles in their bones and gives them a quiet confidence no one can shake. Silence is the empath's revenge, but it's not about getting even. It's about getting free. And once they've tasted that kind of peace, they'll never return to the noise. Pain was never just pain for the empath. It was a deep, burning ache that reached into their core. It wasn't just sadness. It was heartbreak they carried in their chest, in their bones, in their breath. They felt everything, too deeply, too much, for too long. Every word that cut, every look that dismissed them, every manipulation they endured, it all left marks, invisible ones. And for a time, that pain defined them. It made them question their worth. It made them shrink themselves to fit someone else's comfort. It made them believe they had to earn love by sacrificing their own needs. The narcissist used that pain like a tool, pressing on old wounds, reopening them, weaponizing their vulnerability to keep the empath small, scared, and quiet. But the thing about empaths is that their pain doesn't stay buried forever. Eventually, that pain begins to burn in a different way, not to destroy, but to transform. The tears that once fell in silence become rivers that carve out new strength. The cracks in their spirit become spaces for light to pour through. They begin to realize that every wound was a lesson, every scar a map leading them back to themselves. And slowly, what once drained them starts to fuel them. They stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What is this teaching me?" That shift changes everything. The heartbreak becomes purpose. The silence becomes wisdom. The emptiness becomes space for something new to grow. They take all that pain and turn it into foundation. And on that foundation, they start building. Day by day, breath by breath. Not loudly, not with a show, but with steady courage. They dive into healing, not to erase what happened, but to reclaim who they are. They find joy again, not in grand gestures, but in the smallest moments. A peaceful morning, a deep breath, a quiet evening without chaos. They write, they walk, they cry, they rest, they create. They begin to surround themselves with people who feel safe, not just familiar. And they stop apologizing for taking up space, for having needs, for finally putting themselves first. The pain no longer controls them. It drives them to be better, not bitter, stronger, not colder, wiser, not harder. They become intentional with their energy. They learn to say no without guilt and yes without fear. They stop explaining their boundaries and start enforcing them. And in that transformation, they discover their true self, not the version shaped by survival, but the one rooted in self-love. The narcissist may never see this version. They may never understand how deeply they wounded someone who only wanted to love them. But it doesn't matter, because the empath no longer needs to be seen by them. They see themselves now, and that's more than enough. What once kept them in cycles of pain has become the fire that fuels their rise. They are not broken. They are becoming. And in that becoming, they find peace, purpose, power, not because the pain disappeared, but because they chose to grow through it instead of being consumed by it. That is the quiet miracle of the empath's journey, turning pain into power without losing their heart in the process. There comes a quiet but powerful shift when the empath detaches, not physically at first, but emotionally. And that moment, though invisible to the outside world, is everything. It doesn't start with slamming doors or dramatic goodbyes. It starts with a pause, a deep breath, and a single decision. I'm not playing anymore. The empath, who once reacted to every insult, tried to explain every misunderstanding, tried to fix every silent treatment, no longer feels the need to engage. The emotional strings that once tied them to the narcissist, those cords made of guilt, hope, confusion, and love, begin to fall away. And when those cords snap, the narcissist's grip slips. That's when everything starts to crumble for them. Because narcissists don't just crave control, they feed on it. They thrive on reactions, on pulling emotional strings, on knowing they can get under your skin whenever they want. But now, when they provoke, the empath doesn't flinch. When they play the victim, the empath doesn't rush in. When they blame, the empath doesn't defend. When they lie, the empath doesn't even argue. There's no more performance. No more emotional labor. No more talking it out when the narcissist never intended to listen in the first place. And that silence, that calm detachment, is their undoing. The narcissist begins to panic, but they won't show it directly. They'll test the waters, send a vague text, act unusually sweet, try to stir up guilt or curiosity. But this time, the empath sees it for what it is, bait, and they don't bite. That's the new power they've stepped into. Not revenge, not bitterness, just pure, grounded clarity. They know now that nothing they do will change the narcissist, and they finally stop trying. And in that release, they reclaim everything the narcissist once stole: peace of mind, emotional freedom, self-respect. The narcissist, unable to pull the strings they once used with such ease, begins to spiral. Without the empath's energy to feed on, they are left with their own emptiness, and they hate that silence. They hate not being able to provoke a reaction. But the empath doesn't owe them a response anymore, not even an explanation, because they now understand. Explaining yourself to someone who's committed to misunderstanding you is a trap, and the only way to win is to walk away from the game entirely. That's what emotional detachment is. Not coldness, but protection. Not indifference, but wisdom. It's choosing to no longer be an actor in someone else's play. And as the narcissist scrambles to regain control, the empath begins to build a new life, one that doesn't revolve around being enough for someone else. They learn to sit in peace, to enjoy quiet, to live without needing to be on constant emotional alert. They rediscover who they were before the gaslighting, before the manipulation, before the confusion. And that person is powerful, not because they yell, not because they fight, but because they've become immune to the bait. They've broken the pattern. And that is the greatest loss the narcissist will ever face. Not just losing the empath's presence, but losing their power over them. Because when the empath emotionally detaches, they don't just walk away, they rise. There was a time when the empath was just a mirror, soft, clear, and wide open, reflecting back everything the narcissist projected. The pain, the insecurity, the childhood wounds the narcissist never dared to face, all of it landed on the empath like broken glass. And without realizing it, the empath held those shards close, thinking it was love. The narcissist didn't want healing. They wanted validation. They needed someone to absorb their darkness and still say, "You're not the problem." And the empath, with their gentle heart and deep intuition, kept reflecting love even when they were met with cruelty. They tried to understand. They tried to soothe. They blamed themselves, even for the things they didn't cause. They thought, if I can just love them enough, maybe they'll change. But nothing changed. And slowly, painfully, the mirror began to crack. Not because the empath was weak, but because they were starting to see clearly. They began to realize they weren't just holding up a reflection. They were being used to avoid accountability. They weren't a partner. They were a container for pain that was never theirs to carry. That realization hurts like hell. Because empaths don't want to give up on people. They see potential. They see who someone could be beneath the wounds. But the turning point comes when the empath realizes that potential isn't a promise. It's a trap. The narcissist wasn't looking to grow. They were looking to avoid. And the empath, in their love, had become the perfect hiding place. But no more. One day, something changes. Maybe it's the hundredth lie. Maybe it's the silence that lasts too long. Maybe it's the flash of clarity in the middle of the night when they finally whisper, "This is not love." Whatever it is, it breaks the illusion. The empath looks in the mirror, not to see the narcissist, but to see themselves. And what they find isn't a broken soul. It's a warrior. Someone who has walked through emotional fire and come out wiser, stronger, braver. They start reclaiming their reflection, not as someone who absorbs pain, but as someone who reflects truth. That same mirror that once showed the narcissist their beauty now shows them their ugliness, their avoidance, their manipulation, their inability to love without control. And the narcissist, they can't stand that mirror anymore, because now it reflects back what they've spent a lifetime running from, themselves. And so, the empath becomes the thing the narcissist fears the most, honest. Not vengeful, not cruel, just real. The empath stops dancing around egos, stops softening truth to keep the peace. They stop apologizing for their standards. And that reflection, it's sharp, it's clean, it's undeniable. The narcissist can no longer hide behind charm or blame. Every excuse they give bounces off the empath's strength and falls flat. The old games don't work anymore. Because the empath isn't reacting, they're observing. They aren't triggered, they're aware. They don't plead, they hold their ground. They've gone from being the mirror of the narcissist's pain to the reflection of their own growth. And in that transformation, the empath becomes untouchable. They set boundaries not to punish, but to protect. They speak up not to be right, but to be real. They walk away, not because they stopped loving, but because they started loving themselves more. That shift isn't loud. It's not angry. It's dignified. It's powerful. And it marks the death of the old mirror, the one that only reflected wounds, and the rise of something far more dangerous, a warrior of truth. A person who still feels deeply but no longer bleeds for people who wouldn't even offer a bandage. They no longer serve as someone's emotional dumping ground. They no longer confuse chaos with chemistry. They now understand that their light is sacred, and not everyone deserves to stand in it. The narcissist will try to break that mirror. They'll call the empath cold, selfish, dramatic, anything to crack the reflection they can no longer control. But it doesn't work. Because this time, the mirror doesn't shatter, it shines. It glows with resilience, with clarity, with the kind of beauty that comes from healing your own wounds and refusing to carry anyone else's. And maybe, just maybe, that light will inspire others to stop reflecting other people's pain and start standing in their truth. Because once an empath becomes a warrior, they don't just save themselves, they light the way for others to do the same. There was a time when the narcissist walked through life cloaked in illusion, charming, persuasive, magnetic, drawing people in like a moth to a flame. They seemed generous, confident, even lovable. But behind that perfect mask was something darker, a fractured self, hollow and desperate for control. And no one made that illusion work better than the empath. The empath was the perfect emotional shield, the buffer that absorbed the narcissist's rough edges and covered their cruelty with kindness. Every time the narcissist raged, the empath soothed. Every time they lied, the empath rationalized. Every time they hurt someone, the empath explained it away as they didn't mean it. The empath became their protector, not of the narcissist's truth, but of their image. But when the empath wakes up, when they pull away from the toxic grip, something extraordinary happens. The narcissist's world begins to collapse, because that mask they wore so confidently, it was never held up by strength. It was held up by supply, by the constant attention, reaction, and emotional labor of the empath. Without it, the narcissist is left naked, exposed, vulnerable in a way they cannot tolerate. And the people around them, they start noticing things they'd never seen before. The jokes aren't so funny anymore. The charm feels forced. The confidence feels more like arrogance. Cracks begin to show. The narcissist, once admired, now seems petty, controlling, and cold. They overreact to small things. They make everything about themselves. They start slipping, unraveling, and people begin whispering, something's not right. That's because the empath was the light source that made the narcissist seem golden. And when that light goes out, all that remains is shadow. For the first time, others see the gaslighting for what it is. They notice the patterns, the manipulation, the need to dominate every conversation, every room, every heart. And while the narcissist scrambles to maintain the facade, maybe by love-bombing new targets or smearing the empath, they can't hide the truth anymore. Because without the empath's quiet grace and emotional labor, the narcissist can't sustain their double life. The lies are too thin, the performance too exhausting. They slip up, they contradict themselves. They show their entitlement, their neediness, their rage. And the worst part for the narcissist, they know it. Deep down, they can feel the power shift. Where once they were admired, now they are doubted. Where once they controlled the narrative, now they are questioned. It drives them frantic, because the thing they fear most isn't loneliness, it's being seen. Truly seen. Not as the hero, not as the victim, but as they are, manipulative, insecure, afraid. They fear being unmasked because without the illusion, they have no identity. They built their life on perception, and now it's crumbling brick by brick. And while the narcissist scrambles to regain control, the empath is rising, not in revenge, but in truth. Not shouting, not slandering, just living, peacefully, authentically. And that authenticity shines a light that exposes everything the narcissist tried to keep hidden. That's what kills them slowly. Not the loss of the empath's presence, but the loss of control over the narrative. The truth begins to speak louder than their manipulation ever could. People who once doubted the empath now circle back, apologizing, realizing. And the narcissist, they become the cautionary tale, the mask that finally cracked, the house of cards that fell. This is justice that doesn't need noise. It doesn't need proof or revenge. It's the quiet unraveling of lies in the presence of unwavering truth. And the empath, once the narcissist's favorite hiding place, now stands as a living mirror. A mirror that no longer reflects the narcissist's fantasy, but reveals their reality. And that, to the narcissist, is the ultimate exposure. There's a misconception about healing from narcissistic abuse, that it requires confrontation, explosive closure, or one final dramatic showdown. But that's not how true empaths operate. Their comeback doesn't need spectacle. It doesn't come wrapped in loud declarations or public retaliation. It unfolds slowly, gracefully, and in silence. Yet that silence thunders in the narcissist's world. Because the empath, once entangled in confusion and pain, has chosen not to fight fire with fire, but to rise above it. This kind of evolution, the quiet, steady kind, is the very thing narcissists can't tolerate. Why? Because they feed on reactions, chaos, and being at the center of someone's emotional universe. But when the empath disappears from that orbit, when they stop explaining, defending, or even acknowledging the narcissist's existence, They reclaim something far more powerful than revenge, their peace. And that peace speaks volumes. It radiates through every area of their life. The empath begins to glow differently. They start thriving, slowly rebuilding their identity, not as a survivor of narcissistic abuse, but as a creator of a new, unshakable self. The same person who once cried behind closed doors is now smiling in the light of their own truth. The same voice that was once silenced by manipulation now speaks through purposeful choices and quiet confidence. And as they move forward, building meaningful relationships, pursuing passions, rediscovering joy, the narcissist watches from a distance, powerless, because they no longer have access. No supply, no narrative. They can't spin a story where the empath is still the broken one, or the one who never moved on. The narcissist's control ends where the empath's growth begins. And this growth doesn't need to be broadcast. It just is. A new career path, a healthy relationship, a calm morning routine, a sense of self-worth that doesn't rely on anyone's approval. Every small act of healing is a loud declaration in the narcissist's world. It says, "You no longer matter, hey." And nothing rattles the narcissist more than being irrelevant, forgotten. They may try to provoke the empath again. They might send messages, play the victim, or suddenly appear with grand gestures. But the empath doesn't flinch. They don't respond, not because they are bitter, but because they've outgrown the entire game. The drama, the push and pull, the constant emotional drain. It no longer fits into their life. They've upgraded their standards, boundaries, and self-awareness. And that kind of growth isn't just healing, it's a revolution. It dismantles everything the narcissist believed they controlled. Because now, the empath is no longer the mirror or the fixer. They are the warrior. Quiet, steady, unshakable. Their revenge is not revenge at all. It's simply living well. Choosing peace over chaos, joy over drama, authenticity over performance. And in doing so, they not only reclaim their power, they rewrite the story entirely. The narcissist becomes a footnote, a shadow of the past. And the empath, they become the author of a new chapter. One that no longer includes the need to prove anything to anyone. That is the kind of comeback the narcissist never saw coming. And it's the kind they can never stop obsessing over. When an empath breaks free from a narcissist's grasp, it's not just a personal victory. It becomes a ripple effect. You see, the empath never intended to become a symbol of strength. They just wanted peace. They just wanted to stop hurting. But in choosing to rise, in deciding to step away from chaos and into their own worth, they unknowingly light a torch in the darkness. And that torch, others can see it. Others who are still stuck, still second-guessing, still walking on eggshells in toxic relationships that drain them day by day. Watching the empath choose themselves shows them what's possible. It offers proof that healing exists. That dignity isn't lost. That boundaries are not punishments, they are protection. When the empath begins living without apology, starts speaking without fear, and smiles again without faking it, it shakes the quiet world of those still suffering. It says, "Look, you can do this too." And those stuck souls begin to whisper to themselves, "Maybe I'm worth saving too." Because someone went first. Someone who once felt just as broken, just as small. The empath becomes a walking reminder that survival isn't enough. We are meant to thrive. And it's not done with loud words or viral declarations. It's done through quiet mornings, steady boundaries, firm no's, and gentle self-respect. Each step away from dysfunction becomes a visible path others can follow. Sometimes, the empath doesn't even know they are leading. They are simply trying to reclaim their life. But in doing so, they show others how to reclaim theirs. Friends begin to notice the shift. Family members who once normalized dysfunction begin to feel uncomfortable in the presence of someone. Because without the empath's quiet grace and emotional labor, the narcissist can't sustain their double life. The lies are too thin. The performance too exhausting. They slip up. They contradict themselves. They show their entitlement, their neediness, their rage. And the worst part for the narcissist, they know it. Deep down, they can feel the power shift. Where once they were admired, now they are doubted. Where once they controlled the narrative, now they are questioned. It drives them frantic. Because the thing they fear most isn't loneliness, it's being seen. Truly seen. Not as the hero, not as the victim, but as they are, manipulative, insecure, afraid. They fear being unmasked because without the illusion, they have no identity. They built their life on perception, and now it's crumbling brick by brick. And while the narcissist scrambles to regain control, the empath is rising, not in revenge, but in truth. Not shouting, not slandering, just living, peacefully, authentically. And that authenticity shines a light that exposes everything the narcissist tried to keep hidden. That's what kills them slowly. Not the loss of the empath's presence, but the loss of control over the narrative. The truth begins to speak louder than their manipulation ever could. People who once doubted the empath now circle back, apologizing, realizing. And the narcissist, they become the cautionary tale, the mask that finally cracked, the house of cards that fell. This is justice that doesn't need noise. It doesn't need proof or revenge. It's the quiet unraveling of lies in the presence of unwavering truth. And the empath, once the narcissist's favorite hiding place, now stands as a living mirror. A mirror that no longer reflects the narcissist's fantasy, but reveals their reality. And that, to the narcissist, is the ultimate exposure. There's a misconception about healing from narcissistic abuse, that it requires confrontation, explosive closure, or one final dramatic showdown. But that's not how true empaths operate. Their comeback doesn't need spectacle. It doesn't come wrapped in loud declarations or public retaliation. It unfolds slowly, gracefully, and in silence. Yet that silence thunders in the narcissist's world. Because the empath, once entangled in confusion and pain, has chosen not to fight fire with fire, but to rise above it. This kind of evolution, the quiet, steady kind, is the very thing narcissists can't tolerate. Why? Because they feed on reactions, chaos, and being at the center of someone's emotional universe. But when the empath disappears from that orbit, when they stop explaining, defending, or even acknowledging the narcissist's existence, they reclaim something far more powerful than revenge, their peace. And that peace speaks volumes. It radiates through every area of their life. The empath begins to glow differently. They start thriving, slowly rebuilding their identity, not as a survivor of narcissistic abuse, but as a creator of a new, unshakable self. The same person who once cried behind closed doors is now smiling in the light of their own truth. The same voice that was once silenced by manipulation now speaks through purposeful choices and quiet confidence. And as they move forward, building meaningful relationships, pursuing passions, rediscovering joy, the narcissist watches from a distance, powerless, because they no longer have access. No supply, no narrative. They can't spin a story where the empath is still the broken one, or the one who never moved on. The narcissist's control ends where the empath's growth begins. And this growth doesn't need to be broadcast. It just is. A new career path, a healthy relationship, a calm morning routine, a sense of self-worth that doesn't rely on anyone's approval. Every small act of healing is a loud declaration in the narcissist's world. It says, "You no longer matter, hey." And nothing rattles the narcissist more than being irrelevant, forgotten. They may try to provoke the empath again. They might send messages, play the victim, or suddenly appear with grand gestures. But the empath doesn't flinch. They don't respond, not because they are bitter, but because they've outgrown the entire game. The drama, the push and pull, the constant emotional drain. It no longer fits into their life. They've upgraded their standards, boundaries, and self-awareness. And that kind of growth isn't just healing, It's a revolution. It dismantles everything the narcissist believed they controlled. Because now, the empath is no longer the mirror or the fixer. They are the warrior. Quiet, steady, unshakable. Their revenge is not revenge at all. It's simply living well. Choosing peace over chaos. Joy over drama. Authenticity over performance. And in doing so, they not only reclaim their power, they rewrite the story entirely. The narcissist becomes a footnote, a shadow of the past. And the empath, they become the author of a new chapter. One that no longer includes the need to prove anything to anyone. That is the kind of comeback the narcissist never saw coming. And it's the kind they can never stop obsessing over. When an empath breaks free from a narcissist's grasp, it's not just a personal victory. It becomes a ripple effect. You see, the empath never intended to become a symbol of strength. They just wanted peace. They just wanted to stop hurting. But in choosing to rise, in deciding to step away from chaos and into their own worth, they unknowingly light a torch in the darkness. And that torch, others can see it. Others who are still stuck, still second-guessing, still walking on eggshells in toxic relationships that drain them day by day. Watching the empath choose themselves shows them what's possible. It offers proof that healing exists. That dignity isn't lost. That boundaries are not punishments, they are protection. When the empath begins living without apology, starts speaking without fear, and smiles again without faking it, it shakes the quiet world of those still suffering. It says, look, you can do this too. And those stuck souls begin to whisper to themselves, maybe I'm worth saving too. Because someone went first. Someone who once felt just as broken, just as small. The empath becomes a walking reminder that survival isn't enough. We are meant to thrive. And it's not done with loud words or viral declarations. It's done through quiet mornings, steady boundaries, firm no's, and gentle self-respect. Each step away from dysfunction becomes a visible path others can follow. Sometimes, the empath doesn't even know they are leading. They are simply trying to reclaim their life. But in doing so, they show others how to reclaim theirs. Friends begin to notice the shift. Family members who once normalized dysfunction begin to feel uncomfortable in the presence of someone. No more performing. Just presence. Just peace. The narcissist no longer knows how to exist in that light. Because it cannot be used. It cannot be dimmed. It is owned. And with that, the dynamic dissolves. What once felt like an endless cycle now feels like a closed chapter. They never expected the empath to survive. Not really. They thought their control, their manipulation, their twisted games would keep the empath in a permanent state of confusion, always doubting, always reacting, always trying to prove they were good enough. But the empath has changed. This is not the same person who cried themselves to sleep after every gaslighting conversation. This is someone who no longer waits for an apology. Someone who no longer hopes for change, and someone who was never interested in healing. This is a soul that was cracked open. Yes, but through those cracks, light poured in. And that light turned every wound into wisdom. Every betrayal into discernment. Every tear into quiet, powerful resolve. The empath is no longer reacting. They are observing. And that's the scariest thing for a narcissist, because once the empath observes without emotion, they see the narcissist for what they really are. Not a mysterious, powerful figure. Just a frightened child hiding behind masks of superiority. The empath's silence used to mean confusion. Now, it means strategy. It means strength. It means the game is over. Because the empath finally understands, there is no winning with a narcissist. The only win is walking away, rebuilding, rising. And that's what they've done. Piece by piece. Slowly, quietly, away from the drama, away from the chaos. They didn't post about it. They didn't announce it. But they rebuilt a life rooted in truth, in peace, in self-worth. And while the narcissist still plays the same games with new targets, the empath is living proof that healing is possible. They are no longer ashamed of what happened to them. They talk about it now, not as victims, but as survivors, as warriors, as light bearers for others still stuck in the cycle. They've learned to read energy better than words, to trust their body over someone's manipulative smile, to say no without guilt, to walk away without needing closure. Because closure from a narcissist is another trap. It's bait. It's a trick to get you back into the cycle. But the empath doesn't fall for it anymore. They've felt the cost of going back too many times. They've walked through the fire and know what it takes to come out clean. And now, they protect their peace like a fortress. They guard their energy like a treasure. Not everyone gets access anymore. That naive openness they once had, it's gone. Not in a bitter way, but in a wise way. They still love, still care, still give, but not blindly. Not to people who feed on it. And here's the shift the narcissist never anticipated. The empath is no longer trying to fix anyone. That compulsion, the deep desire to heal, to rescue, to pour themselves into someone else's brokenness, has been replaced with boundaries, with discernment, with a calm refusal to carry what isn't theirs. They've finally understood that love is not martyrdom, that being a good person doesn't mean tolerating abuse, that spiritual growth is not about staying silent while someone destroys you. It's about walking away when it costs you your soul. And now that they've walked away, they are not just free, they are dangerous. Not because they seek revenge, but because they've reclaimed themselves. Their clarity is dangerous. Their peace is dangerous. Their growth is dangerous. Because it exposes the narcissist. Because it shows others what real strength looks like. Not domination, but healing. Not control, but peace. And this evolution wasn't easy. It was brutal. It required losing parts of themselves they thought they couldn't live without. It meant facing uncomfortable truths about their own patterns, their own wounds, their own shadow. But they did it. They sat in that discomfort instead of running back. They journaled, prayed, screamed into pillows, had sleepless nights filled with doubt. But they stayed with themselves. That's the difference. The narcissist runs from themselves. The empath turned inward, faced the pain, held space for it, and in doing so, they became whole. They realized they don't need fixing, they need honoring, that their sensitivity is not a weakness, it's a gift, a radar for truth, a built-in lie detector. And now, they use it, not to overextend, but to protect. What the narcissist doesn't understand is that empaths don't stay down forever. They break, they bend, but eventually, they rise. And when they do, they are not the same. Their softness remains, but it's wrapped in steel. Their heart is still open, but it's guarded by wisdom. Their compassion still flows, but not at their own expense. They've become selective, intentional, aware, and that awareness, that's the weapon. Because now they spot manipulation before it takes root. They don't engage. They don't argue. They don't chase. They simply leave. Quietly, powerfully, and that silence echoes louder than any confrontation ever could. Now, the narcissist is confused. Their tactics aren't working. The empath isn't triggered, isn't begging, isn't explaining. They are calm, and that calm is terrifying, because it means the narcissist is losing control. The supply is gone. The game has ended. And what's worse, the empath isn't just surviving, they are thriving, creating, laughing, loving, living a life so full that the narcissist's absence feels like freedom, like fresh air, like a rebirth. Other people are watching, too. They are noticing. They are realizing something's off about the narcissist now that the empath isn't around to absorb the damage. The mask is slipping. The lies aren't landing. The charm isn't working, because the empath took their light back, and with it, the narcissist's illusion is crumbling. That's what happens when a true source of love walks away. It leaves a void nothing fake can fill. And the empath knows that now. They are not looking back, not wishing it were different. They've accepted the truth, and they've turned it into power. They've learned that their worth was never in how much they could endure, but in how quickly they can now walk away. That healing isn't about erasing the past, but transforming the meaning of it. They no longer say, "Why did this happen to me?" but "What did it awaken in me?" They've stopped trying to save people who are committed to misunderstanding them. That's not love, that's self-abandonment. And they refuse to abandon themselves ever again. So now, they speak with clarity, set boundaries with grace, and love with depth, but never desperation. Their love is no longer a sacrifice. It's a gift. A rare, precious offering given only to those who can honor it. And that shift, that's what makes them unstoppable. Because nothing is more powerful than a healed empath. Nothing more radiant than someone who's been to hell and still chooses light. Nothing more courageous than a soul who loved a narcissist and still found a way to love themselves. They become living proof that pain can birth power. That being broken isn't the end. It's the beginning of something sacred. They are not victims of a narcissist's game. They are victors over their own healing journey. And that's what terrifies the narcissist most. The empath didn't just escape. They evolved. And in doing so, they exposed the illusion. They became the truth the narcissist cannot manipulate. The mirror they can't look into. The storm they can't control.